behalf of Allahabad University Psychology Alumni Association, I welcome all of you who are with us today. I extend a warm welcome to our guest speaker today, Professor Poortinga, Professor Emeritus at Tilburg University. And I'm very thankful, very grateful that he accepted our invitation for this special lecture at a very short time. Thank you, sir. I also welcome Professor Tripathi, Professor R.C. Tripathi, Professor Janak Pandey, Professor R.K. Naidu, and all our present and former faculty who are with us on this special occasion. I also welcome all the alumni who are here today with us in this evening. I welcome all the students and guests who are not the alumni, but who have shown interest and are with us today evening. Now, today we have gathered here to celebrate a very special occasion, and the occasion is the Diamond Jubilee of our very own Department of Psychology. And also the 99th birthday of Professor Durganand Sinha, who was the founder head of our department. We have organized a 3-day program now, but we intend to continue organizing more programs throughout the year in this centenary year of Professor Durganand Sinha. Now, about the Alumni Association, we have completed 60 years of our existence because the department started in 1961. Now, about the Alumni Association, I invite Dr. Kavita Agarwal to say a few words.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Allahabad University Psychology Alumni Association was supposed to be formed in 2011, and during the first alumni meet, which was held here in Allahabad, but somehow it was not formed during that time. Then during the second alumni meet in January 2019, the idea was again discussed, and finally Allahabad University Psychology Alumni Association came into existence after getting registered in July 2019. We have since been organizing a few events till the pandemic broke. Now the association has organized a 3-day program on this special occasion. I would like to thank the alumni who were very enthusiastic for this event. I would like to especially thank Professor Mala Sinha, Professor Shubhra Gaur, Dr. Deepak Gupta, Professor Anjali Srivastava, Dr. Anjali, Professor Mahima Singh, Professor Sandeep Anand, and Mr. Vijay Pandey. I also want to thank Professor Namita Pandey, Professor Komila Thapa, Professor Yoganand Sinha, Professor Deepa Punetha, Professor Neena Kohli, who is the present head of the department, Dr. Shanti Suman and Dr. Ritu Modi, who are also the present and former faculty of the department. I would like to thank our advisor, Professor R.C. Tripathi, who attended several of our meetings and gave us valuable suggestions. Professor Janak Pandey and Professor R.K. Naidu had also been very supportive for this event. I cannot forget to thank our wonder girl Aditi Pandey, who has been working with us in all our planning and providing us the much needed continued technical support. Now we are going to start today's program. Aditi, to please digitally light the lamp. All of you are requested to light your lamps, candles, and display on your videos.
Shubham kurutvam kalyanam arogyam dhanasampada. Shubham kurutvam kalyanam arogyam dhanasampada. Shatru buddhi vinashaya deepajyoti नित्यनिद्रता शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
I now request Professor R.C. Tripathi to inaugurate the program and say a few words on the significance of the day. Professor Tripathi, sir, please.
Thank you very much, Kavita, for inviting me to speak on this very special occasion for all of us. The Department of Psychology today has arrived at a very significant post in its 60th year in its journey towards achieving excellence both in teaching and in research. All of you here have been part of that journey, along with your teachers, with your fellow students, excuse me, and the staff of this department. So I want to congratulate you on this momentous achievement. I especially want to congratulate the teachers who have made this possible through their efforts. And today, we're also remembering the founder head of the department, Professor Durganand Sinha, whose centennial celebrations started yesterday. He has always been with us in this journey, although for the past many years he has not been with us, but there hasn't been a time when he has not been on our minds, or what he has been doing has not inspired us. An occasion like this may call for looking back and see and ask how far have we come. I've been part of the department for 57 years, and this is my 58th year. So I've seen how it began in a very decrepit building which used to be called the Girls' Waiting Hall. It had only a small hall which was partitioned into two with the help of a wooden partition which we still have somewhere in the department. One part of that particular hall was used to seat students, and the other part was reserved for the research staff. We had 3 office rooms, one for Professor Sinha and 2 for the faculty. Our undergraduate classes met outside the department, sometimes in the Department of Philosophy. I met my first class there, and Professor Naidu was one of the students in that class, along with Mrs. Naidu. And later on in the Hindi department. We moved to our new building in 1968, added a new wing in 1984. And then this adjacent building of the CBCS came up somewhere around 2004, 2005 or whatever. So we've come a long way, but we've come a long way not only in adding numbers, but also I think in doing what we and achieving in what we really wanted to achieve. We became a strong teaching department from day one. I recall that because who would boast being taught by a colleague of Abraham Maslow? J.B. Clee, who was a Fulbright fellow, was with us. And I'm sure that Professor Naidu remembers him. He was a tall guy and was a colleague of Abraham Maslow. He came and he taught. Lillian Fisher was there. Ia Corner from University of I was going to say Washington. It's not Washington, Wisconsin was there. There were several, who followed them. But our teachers, be it Professor C.H.K. Mishra, Pramod Kumar Ji, Prem Shankar, who actually worked with Edwards, who had this Edwards preference, personal preference scale, they were all there. So all of these students we're really talking about, they got educated not from people who had just sort of graduated, but from, like me, but also from teachers who already had been there in profession for a long period of time. And that interest, which began in 1965, when Professor Sinha started doing his studies on Indian villages in transition, that continued. That was responsible for naming our department as a Center for Social Change and National Development when we sought special assistance from the University Grants Commission. Our focus remained not only on social change and national development. A very significant shift came when we started saying that, well, there is a lot of positivistic kind of psychology that that's being done all over the world. But that's not the only kind of psychology that we need to feel concerned about. We need to really focus on what we can learn from literature. We can learn from philosophy. We can learn from everywhere. I think when we're talking about human behavior, you can understand human behavior from all kinds of sources. And it's here that indigenous psychology became very important. I think a lot of credit for that should go to Professor Naidu, because that's something which picked up later on, not only in India, but it also picked up elsewhere. I can keep going on and talk about, what we have done. But I think what gives me a great deal of satisfaction, particularly today, when I'm talking to you, who have been a student of this department, is the kind of achievement which you have made in your field And it's not only in academia, it's in different fields. I can see somebody like Anup Singh sitting in front of me who happens to head an educational institution like NEMA as Vice Chancellor. We have had two of our students, Usha Nair and Shalini Bharat, who have headed Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And they have all made us very, very proud. But there are a very large number of students who have excelled not only in doing psychology, but in other fields also. They have gone on to do management. I was thinking of somebody who used to be a student of mine way back in 1966, who joined me at the University of Michigan and did her PhD from University of Michigan in organizational behavior. She is a chair professor at the University of Arkansas today. Sandeep, for example, is in management. There are quite a few of our students who are in Indian Institutes of Management, be it I am Ahmedabad, be it I am Shillong, be it I am Raipur, be it I am Indore, and so many other places. They're also there in the IITs. All I'm trying to say here is that you have followed the logo of the University of Allahabad, Quote Rami, Quote Arboros. You truly have been another banyan tree. You have been our branches. We love you. Keep connected with the department. That is because the department more than ever needs you and needs your support. There was another student of ours I got connected to only yesterday. I don't know whether she is here or not, from the United States. Rashmi Rekha Sinha. Some of you may not know her by name, but she's someone you will immediately identify. She's someone who started LinkedIn. She's someone who's connected with a slide share. Those are names, I think, if you do research, if you are connected, I mean, you do the kind of professionals you are. But more than that, she earned her PhD from Brown University. And her focus was on something which will interest CBCS people, brain and behavior. Our alumni are there not only in India, but some of them are here today. I mentioned Lalit, who used to be with the BBC, a very, very distinguished media person, who has remained connected with us and is with us today. They have excelled in all kinds of fields. They have been with the foreign services, they have been judges. Some of them have become chief justices of different high courts. I welcome all of you, and I again say that all of us teachers feel very, very proud of you. I hope that you will continue to do well wherever you are. Thank you very much. I welcome AUPAA, and I thank AUPAA particularly because you're so gracious by accepting our invitation. We have never considered you as an outsider. You have always been us. So thank you for being with us and for delivering this lecture on this very, very special occasion for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Kavita.
Thank you, sir. For the next session, now I invite Professor Janak Pandey, advisor, the Alumni Association, to please chair the session and introduce the speaker, Professor Poortinga. Professor Pandey. Pandey was here.
Yes. I welcome all the people present on the screen and our distinguished speaker, Professor Poortinga, our long-time friend and associate in many ways. I would, before I request Aditi to formally read highlights of biodata of Professor Poortinga, I would like to suggest, based on yesterday's experience, that after the formal presentation of Professor Poortinga, we use time very judiciously and give maximum persons to say a few words. Yesterday, a few people tried to take away more time. We need to be also conscious of the time. It is 5:30. So we would like to conclude 7 or 15 minutes after 7. We start losing people, so try to manage time, and I will like to do that. So now I request Aditi to read highlights of our distinguished speakers' biodata, Professor Poortinga's biodata. Aditi.
Thank you, sir. Professor Poortinga studied experimental psychology and psychometrics at the Free University in Amsterdam, where he obtained a doctorate in the social sciences in 1971 on a research conducted in Southern Africa. He's Emeritus Professor of Cross-Cultural Psychology at Tilburg University in the Netherlands and at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Currently, he enjoys hospitality arrangements with Tilburg University and the Free University in Amsterdam. His most consistent research interest has been the question how psychological data obtained in different populations can be compared meaningfully. His empirical work has dealt with a variety of topics in cross-cultural research, including information transmission, basic personality variables, emotions, and social psychological variables in societies as far apart as Southern Africa, India, Indonesia, and Mexico. His experience in applied fields includes program evaluation, test development and adaptation, and intercultural communication training. He has been active in various organizations of psychologists, such as International Test Commission, the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology. Since 2016, he is a fellow of the National Academy of Psychology as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. I would like to add a few things. Professor Poortinga has been very kind to accept our request. You may recall he visited the Silver Jubilee celebration of NAO in 2016. He is not a cross-cultural psychologist working from his office. He has spent quite a bit of his time in the actual field from where his research participants have contributed in developing the theory. He has spent time in Orissa. He has spent quite a bit time in Allahabad, and he likes to live the lifestyle the way locals have that lifestyle. I recall just one incident. I was buying paneer at a Hira Lal Halwai shop, and he was pillion rider on my scooter, and that was at that time Vijay Super Scooter. And he tells me, if you are buying here, that was an open shop, and if I cannot buy and eat paneer, then I should better stay in Amsterdam or Tilburg. So he relates himself. He has related himself with the population from where he has drawn his data. The other great contribution is, as I see personally, the association which you see, International Association of Cross-Cultural Psychology, which has great impact on psychology today. It has actually changed the direction of psychology. He is one of a major pillar to establish it. I recall Professor Ghosh is not with us. Professor E.S.K. Ghosh, myself, at that time I was at IIT Kanpur, and Professor Sinha attended the 3rd International Congress of Cross-Cultural Psychology at Tilburg. And the care he has taken to bring people from different parts of the world who were not in a position to attend the conference. So a great builder of the professional institution and a great researcher. We are very lucky to have you, sir, and we welcome you to be today's our speaker.
Thank you, Janak. And I think you have my lecture, so I presume that that will be started from your side. Is that correct? The title of my presentation is Cross-Cultural Psychology in the Global Village, Reminiscences, Reflections and Prophecies. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you with the Diamond Jubilee of the Department of Psychology. To give some substance to my congratulations and my best wishes for the future, I consulted the website of the University of Allahabad and found psychology listed with the Faculty of Arts. One sentence of the description of what psychology stands for is quoted on the slide. Namely, the study of human psyche. I must say that I am already somehow jumping the gun. Sorry, I'll start again with this quote from the university website: the study of human psyche and search for the why of human behavior has always been an integral part of our thinking and heritage in the Indian tradition. The description on the website also mentions that psychology was established in 1961 and that Professor Durganand Sinha was the first staff member. I found the Center for Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences mentioned only under institutes. I see the center as representing an essential part of psychology because, and I quote, it conducts research related in various areas of behavioral and cognitive sciences, end of quote. Hence, I like to include the center explicitly in my congratulations. The event also celebrates that Durganand Sinha, or Prof. Sinha, as most of his colleagues refer to him, was born a century ago. Several of you present at this meeting are in a much better position than I am to recall his many contributions and to reflect on his significance for psychology as a science and profession in India and beyond. I will limit myself to a few personal comments. As we were both active in cross-cultural psychology, it was unavoidable that we would meet. The first time I had substantial interactions with Prof. Sinha was in 1976 on the occasion of the Congress of the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology, IACCP, held in Tilburg that year. Prof. Sinha had been instrumental in the acceptance of applications for travel funds of several colleagues from India. A few years later, from 1982 to 1984, we had a fairly intensive correspondence when Prof. Sinha was president of the IACCP and I was Secretary General. Numerous airmail letters with Prof. Sinha's signature still can be found in the IACCP archive. And please realize that all this happened well before the times of internet and email. There was another exchange of letters when Prof. Sinha contributed a chapter on indigenizing psychology to the second edition of the Handbook of Cross-Cultural Psychology. John Barry, the senior editor, asked me to be the acting editor for this chapter, an easy task as the first draft was well written and informative. As elsewhere in Prof. Sinha's work, Western psychology is argued to have limited relevance for a country like India. An indigenous perspective is essential. However, it needs to be added that the chapter does not envision separate psychologies for the future. It does not emphasize controversy, but seeks integration. I will now turn to some of my memories of numerous visits to Allahabad and interaction with colleagues. My personal memories of the department go back to 1981 when some of us came to Allahabad after the IACCP conference held at Utkal University in Bhubaneswar. Here you see a picture illustrating the extent of the hospitality for foreign guests. We were fetched from the station and brought to the station. John Barry was one of the visitors. He took the photograph, which explains why he is not in it. On this picture taken during the same visit, you see me rowing a boat at the confluence of the rivers. Until this day, I wonder whether it was considered socially appropriate for a young academic scholar to engage in the menial task of rowing. At the same time, if this was a transgression, I am sure that I have committed far more serious social offenses in Allahabad. The Dutch tend to consider themselves to be honest and open, a positive self-stereotype that covers up for what others see as rude and disrespectful behavior. I am sure that on many occasions I have behaved in this Dutch fashion. Please allow me to use this opportunity to apologize for all my violations of subtle Indian standards that I have transgressed unwittingly. During several visits to the department, I have interacted with numerous colleagues. Some have passed away, others are still active. In the interest of time, I will mention only 3 names of those colleagues I cooperated with most extensively. The first to mention is Professor Rashmi Kumar. She had a significant role in a project on norm violations to which I will come back later. On this slide, you see a gathering at Tilburg University of Rashmi and other people involved in the project. The second person to be named is Professor Janak Pandey. It is thanks to him that I was given the opportunity to smoke marijuana. Please note that this was a scientific experiment supervised by 2 university professors, Janak Pandey, who encouraged me, and Professor Rama Tripathi, who shook his wise head but agreed to co-supervise the event. I smoked 2 joints because I did not feel anything after smoking 1. Even after the 2 joints were finished, I still did not have even the slightest extraordinary experience. However, well after the experiment ended, I got violently sick. With a toilet at hand and a good night's sleep, from which I woke up the next morning as fresh as a lettuce, there was no bad ending. My curiosity about the effect of marijuana was satisfied permanently, and I like to use this occasion to thank Janak again for having organized the marijuana. Please note that this smoking was only a small episode of the numerous interactions between Janak and me. I contributed, I believe, 4 times a chapter to a book edited by Janak Pandey, and Janak and I were the co-editors of the first volume of the 2nd edition of the Handbook of Cross-Cultural Psychology, with John Barry as general editor. The third person I like to mention explicitly is Professor Rama Tripathi.
So my internet just went off. Just 1 minute and reconnect and play from where we left off.
No problem. No problem, Aditi, take time. There has to be some developing country experience to AUPAA.
Janak and others?
Yeah.
I can tell you this is a universal experience. It happens everywhere from time to time.
Yeah. You know, I come from Bihar, which gets every year flooded and in the news. But this year I was surprised to see the same flooding in New York City.
Yeah. And very badly in Germany.
Yes.
Yeah. And other places in Western Europe. We also had flooding. I think if nothing else works, I could try to deliver the paper again from my end.
In the meanwhile, you try to locate yourself in the paper. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's better.
Well,
Thursday. Yeah.
That will be the best.
Yes.
Okay. As long as that works.
Yes.
Now, first, I'd like to know, can you understand me properly, at least in Allahabad? Janak?
Yes. What you
Alup
want?
Singh, can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you.
You can.
You are perfect.
Okay.
You are
All right.
perfect.
We can
Then
hear.
I will try to find the lecture.
Yes.
Yeah,
Would you?
yeah, it is there.
You see now a somewhat discolored Professor Rama Tripathi. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'll try to continue my presentation from there. Rushing a bit in the interest of time. I said the third person I like to mention explicitly is Professor Rama Tripathi. He played a leading role together with Richard de Ridder from Tilburg University in the research project on reactions to norm violations that I mentioned and will mention again. More recently, Rama became involved in projects on human rights together with an, I might say, very close friend of mine, Polly Hagedas. All in all, I have many memories of visits to Allahabad, and my several visits have influenced my outlook on the interrelationships between context and human behavior in various ways. I am grateful for the opportunities given to me and see this gathering as a good occasion to note this explicitly. Now I have to. What have been the outcomes of all these visits and interactions? An immediate answer you will find on this slide. These are publications from my bookshelf to which both colleagues from Allahabad and I contributed. There is no time to review all of them, and I will limit myself to a few comments. The proceedings of the International Conference of Cognitive Science of 2004, referred to in the heading of this slide, was the international launch of the Center of Behavioral and Cognitive Science. The special funding of the University Grants Commission that enabled the establishment of the center was a clear national recognition of the status of psychology in Allahabad. I see the center also as a major step in the development of psychology as a science in India, testified by the research and publications of the first director, Dr. Durganand Sinha, and several of his colleagues. Research topics studied at the center often have arisen from the Indian context. At the same time, these topics are addressed with common methods from international psychological science, including cognitive neuroscience. The chapter I contributed to the book that followed from the conference, I see as one of my better publications. It addresses the question of the generalizability of cross-cultural differences and the relationships between levels of generalizability and levels of psychometric equivalence in cross-cultural data sets. I will not dwell on this now, as some points come back later on. The most extensive research project, bridging Allahabad University and Tilburg University, was in reactions to norm violations and intergroup relations. The lead investigators were Richard de Ridder and Rama Tripathi. Several others also participated, including Rashmi Kumar and Emmanuel Ghosh from Allahabad and JBP Sinha from the A.N. Sinha Institute of Social Studies in Patna. The project was a questionnaire study in which participants reported expected reactions to norm violations committed by members of another social group with members of one's own group as victims. The participants also reported the expected reaction of members of the other group to norm violations by members of their own group. On the slide, you can see how the project was designed. The lead authors were keen on studying effects of reactions to norm violations of the variables relative deprivation, attitudes, own group identity, and perceived power. However, for this presentation, I will skip these results, which were rather similar for India and the Netherlands. From the perspective of cross-cultural psychology, there are other features to note. On the slide, you see how items were formulated. From the example, in a bus, an X refuses to give his seat to a crippled Y. For X, a group name was mentioned, and for Y, another group name was mentioned. The slide also shows the two group contrasts in India and the two group contrasts in the Netherlands where data were collected. The two group contrasts in India are Hindus and Muslims and managers and workers. And the two contrasts in the Netherlands are Dutch people by birth, Dutch, and Turkish migrants, people of Turkish origin. And the other contrast was between managers and workers as in India. we realized that for each item in each group, there were two versions of an item. For example, for the managers versus worker group contrast, we filled in a crippled manager for X and a worker for Y. The alternative version of the same item would specify a crippled worker for X and a manager for Y. So the item in the example could read, in a bus, a manager refuses to give his seat to a crippled worker. For the same item, we also had the version, in a bus, a worker refuses to give his seat to a crippled worker. In this way, the items could inquire how respondents expected that their own group would react to a norm violation by the other group, but also how they expected that the other group would react to a norm violation committed by members of their own group. We are looking for relative differences here. We are not trying to establish the absolute level of reactions to norm violations, which is a much more tricky endeavor in cross-cultural psychology. For each item, the respondents chose an answer from 5 alternatives that had been formulated in such a way that there always was a reaction stronger than the original norm violation. This is marked as R larger than. There was also a reaction that matched more or less the original norm violation, marked as R equal, tit for tat. There was a reaction that amounted to a norm violation, but a milder norm violation than the original norm violation, R smaller than. The fourth alternative amounted to no reaction, R 0. The respondent indicated in this case that his group would just let the norm violation specified in the item go by. And the final reaction would be a positive or constructive reaction. It is marked as R plus. For example, a fellow of the crippled worker would help the route manager getting off the bus. Here you see the expected reactions to norm violations, the results of the expected reaction to norm violation study. The 5 points on the response scale are marked below. Each white blue bar gives the average expected reaction to norm violations of own group, and the associated narrow blue bar gives the average reaction of the other group. If groups would respond predominantly with a tit-for-tat reaction, conflicts would last indefinitely. They would continue to play out at the same level. It is clear that all groups in the study expected on average a much less strong reaction than the original norm violation. In other words, among coexisting groups, norms of de-escalation appear to become operative when negative intergroup behavior has arisen. A book entitled Norm Violation and Intergroup Relations, edited by Richard de Ridder and Rama Tripathi, was published in 1982 by Oxford University Press. In that book, explanations are provided for the relative small differences between the sets of bars. Here, I like to emphasize the overall similarity in the results for all pairs of groups. Every group expected from their own group as well as from the other group a milder reaction than an original norm violating act. When Richard and I came to Allahabad in the 1980s to set up the Norm Violations Project, the initial idea was to find common items for a common questionnaire. Discussion focused on an observation that has struck many foreigners in India, namely that at a ticket booth in a railway station and at bus stations,
people did not form a queue and generally did not wait for their turn. Jumping a queue is frowned upon in many countries and often not condoned if something can be done about it. Our Indian colleagues emphatically told us that jumping a queue at the station was not a norm violation. At that time, I had become more or less convinced that cross-cultural differences are more or less situation-bound and poorly generalized to broad psychological traits and processes. Hence, I was somewhat relieved when it occurred that in some situations, like wedding receptions, Indian people do form queues and wait for their turn. In other words, waiting for your turn is well established, also in India. Which rule or standard applies depends on conventions, and their societies may well differ. I'd like to present two further examples of work from Allahabad. The first is a study by Durganand Sinha and Rama Tripathi. The other one comes from the center mentioned before. It is by Mishra, Ray, and Srinivasan. The use of dichotomies is a heuristic device in the West. It produces stereotypical and distorted pictures of a complex reality and inevitably leads to our making good comparisons. This is what is argued by Rama Tripathi, by Durganand Sinha and Rama Tripathi in 1984. They administered a questionnaire with 3 response alternatives for each item, meant to reflect an individualistic, a collectivistic, and a situationally oriented response. The third alternative, indicating that it depends on the circumstances whether a more self-oriented or a more other-oriented action will be taken, accounted for well over half of all responses. Examples of the items you see on the slide. My interpretation is that the students indicate that most of the time it will depend on the situation how they answer. In other words, the broad and sweeping individualism collectivism contrast from the literature does not apply. The second study I'd like to mention evaluated a Dutch database consisting of emotional facial expressions of adult Dutch models with an Indian sample. In many respects, this is a sophisticated study. On the slide, some parameters are mentioned for participants, emotions, the stimulus set, and the analyses. So there were 49 observers, 6 emotions, basic emotions and neutral phases were there. There was a large stimulus set of 133 and another large stimulus set of 140 images that were rated by 2 groups of participants, and the analysis addressed not only emotion recognition, but also balance, intensity, clarity, and genuineness. Now, Mishra and all and others mention as the main result, they mention, and I see this as the main result, the overall agreement rate provided by Indian participants across all emotion categories, 88%, was comparable 88% to that of Dutch participants. End of quote. I would say, by all accounts, Indians can read emotions in Dutch faces just as well as the Dutch can. However, if we look at the final sentence from the article, it says, from a theoretical perspective, the study not only indicates cross-cultural differences in emotion classification, but also demonstrate the presence of subtle differences in emotion perception, even when an emotion is accurately categorized, raising questions about the universality of emotion perception. My question, why is there more interest in differences between human population than in psychological invariants? I'll continue.
Yeah,
I continue with the prophecies.
yeah.
There is a historical trend in the literature on cross-cultural psychology. With a new topic or approach in research, initial claims about big and important population differences in psychological functioning tend to be reported. These often do not hold up in later, more carefully designed empirical studies. I mentioned some examples. In the old literature, we had compensation hypotheses. The idea was that in illiterate societies, much psychological energy was invested in the development of perception, but at the cost of the development of cognition and thinking. Such hypotheses have simply disappeared. A second example, literacy has long been a necessary condition for abstract thinking, but the idea was falsified, notably by Michael Cole and colleagues. There has been a long-time idea about the specificity of emotions. Even in the 1980s, serious cross-cultural psychologists argued that some emotions could not be found in that simply did not exist in some other population. The idea is clearly outdated. Another example, Wolff's hypothesis on linguistic relativity. The original hypothesis that through its words and grammar, a language is shaping the thinking and ideas of the speakers of that language has been debunked. Individualism, collectivism, I already dealt with. The East-West differences in social cognitive functioning are my final example. There are a large number of small two-sample studies with East Asian students and students of European descent in the USA. This research tradition is beginning to crack at the seams. In recent large-scale replication research, no support was found for these findings. Let me give a concrete example of a broader analysis with a large data set on the Schwartz value scale. Fisher and Schwartz found, I quote, on average, country differences accounted for only 11% or 12% of the variance in self-ratings. Inter-individual differences within each population accounted for far more of the variance. Again, the obvious conclusion is that cross-cultural differences in psychological functioning are often overrated. We have to ask ourselves whether in research the notion of culture should not be replaced by far more, should not be replaced by far more precisely defined concepts. Baldwin and others argued that culture is to be seen, quote, as an empty sign that people fill with meaning from their own academic backgrounds or personal experiences. Most researchers insist culture exists. However, if a concept cannot be defined, it acquires the same status as a deity in a religion. You cannot capture it by any measurement method. For believers, the interventions of a deity can be evident. We cannot deny the existence. But in empirical science, we try to deal with concepts that somehow can be defined and measured. My prediction is that the use of the concept of culture in empirical research will gradually disappear. My analogy is that the word psyche, the ancient Greek word for soul, that we still find today in the name of psychology, has also disappeared. In the meantime, psychology is not anymore the science of the soul, but the science of overt and covert behavior, whatever the name may try to tell us. Similarly, the notion of a culture is also likely to disappear. In traditional ethnography, a culture presumes substantial differentiation. That is, differences with other populations and permanence, continuity over time. The existence of a cultural group and its culture could be traced often over centuries. With large numbers of people moving and temporarily settling across borders, migrants, sojourners, refugees, increasingly complex interaction patterns have to be accounted for. Nowadays, notions of super diversity and culture mixing have been coined. For research purposes, populations will have to be defined on the basis of relevant variables in a more ad hoc fashion, such as level of income, level of religiosity, experiences of discrimination, etc., which cross traditional population boundaries. So, cross-cultural differences are mainly in conventions. Differences can be defined in terms of knowledge, skills, or attitudes, or some category of situations. There are many terms to refer to this, like customs, habits, practices. I prefer the term conventions, implying agreement in a population about how something ought to be done or ought to be thought of. Conventions are not limited to overt actions. They include beliefs, ways to handle a project, ways to handle problems, etc. For example, preferences for wooden house.
Done speaking. Stop नहीं है. उसने पूरा कर लिया.
Can I continue?
Yes, Deepak, please continue.
Please
Okay,
continue. I think somebody had.
Okay, I'll continue.
You continue.
I'll give here an example of a convention. A convention is, for example, that there is in a society preference for wooden houses over stone houses, like in Scandinavia, or vice versa. And also there are conventions about justifications of conventions. For example, there are reasons in Scandinavia given why wooden houses are better. Conspicuous examples of conventions include greeting rituals and display rules for emotions. There can be striking cross-cultural differences in conventions depending on how information or an action is categorized. An extreme example is abortion. When a fetus is seen as a human being, abortion may be classified as murder. Elsewhere, it is considered to be a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. Conventions can have a long lifetime. An obvious example are scripts and the direction of writing that in some cases have passed from generation to generation over millennia. Thus, my argument is that the most salient differences between populations are found in small domains, not in broad psychological functions and processes as traditionally studied in much of cross-cultural psychology. This does not take away from the fact that there are big and important differences in today's global village. It can be argued that cross-cultural psychologists often have been essentializing differences between human groups at the cost of contextualizing differences as they are found in our common world. A reorientation may be needed with less emphasis on culture as a mediating psychological factor and more emphasis on direct effects of external conditions, such as economic affluence, and effects on manifest behavior and well-being. I need not explain here that poverty denotes much more than a lack of income. It entails hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education, social discrimination, and exclusion. Poverty amounts to a violation of human dignity and a denial of choices and opportunities. Moreover, beyond poverty and inequality, and partly as a consequence of these adverse conditions, the global village is facing rising populism and extremism. Psychologists accustomed to looking beyond the boundaries of their own context have the urgent task to deploy their expertise for advancing individual well-being and community building in the village. Surveying the publications from psychology in Allahabad makes it clear that societal concerns have been high on the agenda to a greater extent than for a longer time than in most departments of psychology elsewhere in the world. Please allow me to express my respect and compliment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Poortinga. Thank you. It was wonderful. And you have done extremely well in the given situation. We are apologetic regarding the failure of the arrangement, but we got the advantageous situation of your live presentation. Live cannot be replaced by recording. So, thank you.
Okay, it seems we're all back.
Yeah. Now I suggest participation. I'm sure this participation will help. Presentation has 3 parts. First part, he has reminiscences, and we appreciate that how highly he holds his experiences of Allahabad and working with colleagues on projects. The second part is the result of norm violation studies. And third, the most exciting part is prophecies he is making for nature of psychology that is evolving and that is on horizon. So I don't know how to pick up names. So if somebody who can help me, I don't know how to do that. But please raise your hand and with your video and all that. Yes.
Well,
I think Professor Pathi wants to say something. Please go ahead.
Well, there are 2 presidents of the former presidents of the IACCP. My question to AUPAA is that if culture disappears, what happens to the association?
Well, what, Rama, don't worry. The psyche has disappeared from psychology, but psychology still exists. And I believe that cross-cultural psychology and its interests in why and how people are different, behaving differently, reacting to different, to all kinds of situations in a different way, is extremely relevant. And it is particularly extremely relevant because we tend to make all kinds of attributions why others are behaving in a particular way. And quite often, as we all know, such attributions, such reasons given for the behavior of others are not positive. So I have absolutely no reason to doubt that there can be a brilliant future for and a very rich future for cross-cultural psychology. So maybe there's younger people listening to this. Don't worry about your future in this respect. I, by the way, would like to use this opportunity to make an apology. It has dawned on me a little too late that the centennial birthday of Professor Sinha is to be taken as the year he was born and not the day he was born. It's not exactly 100 years ago yesterday, and I'd like to apologize particularly to Raghu Sinha as representative of the family. You have been instrumental in getting me to deliver a memorial Sinha lecture, which I'm still very grateful about. And I must apologize that I got your the name of Prof at the birthday of Prof Sinha out by 1 year. Sorry.
Well, Raghu, you want to say a few?
Just one. I thought, AUPAA, would you also like to respond to the kind of studies which Nisbet and Kitayama, etc. people have done on culture and cognition, on culture and thinking? They've been consistently reporting that yes, East Asians and the Westerners, they think differently.
There are definitely differences. I hope that you will not have heard me say that everything is the same. It is about a generalization of differences. These Kitayama and colleagues, they see huge differences on a single dimension, almost a single dichotomy about how Western people perceive and how Eastern people perceive, and related to that, how these different groups think and how they relate to each other socially. And I think that these are immense overgeneralizations. And I feel strengthened by a study like the one by Prof Sinha and yourself, where, you know, the Indian students don't give individualistic reactions or collectivistic reaction, but most of the time they say it depends on the situation. And there are many things which depend on situations. I have been involved in a study on individualism, collectivism, where we found that the situation is determining. To give an example, if you grow up in an Indian village in a large family, your uncles and aunts can be very important for you. They may be the ones who contribute the finances which enable you as a young student to go to the university. That creates a different set of interrelationships with these aunts and uncles, as you will find in the United States of America, where your aunts and uncles may be living in California and your nuclear family is living in New York. The same is happening, I think, in India with urbanization taking over traditional patterns. About 20 years ago, I was informed that it is somewhat problematic sometimes for young Indian people that the parents now buy a nice apartment in a larger city and are going to live there and withdraw the money from the family, which the younger generation would like to continue to use for the business. So apparently there are pressures towards individualism, as it is called, to behavior, which is changing when the situation changes. And this is not a matter of centuries. This is a matter of 1 or 2 generations. And I'm not saying that the way I was brought up is not influencing my own behavior until this very day. But at the same time, during my generation, during my lifetime, there have been many changes which are incompatible with the idea of long-term patterns of culture. So we have to find another solution than what Kitayama and colleagues are proposing. And there is now recent large-scale replication studies which fail to confirm results as have been reported in the literature. At the final slide of my presentation, I mentioned a publication which is about to be published by Cambridge University Press. It comes out next month, and there I give a more detailed criticism of these big, important dimensions, dichotomies in psychological functioning across cultures, across cultural populations.
Yes. Comments, please.
Yep, can I?
Sure.
2 things. Firstly, I'm glad that you named me, but there are other family members of Professor Sinha. His 2 sons and his daughter-in-law are here, and they run the trust in which you were invited. So I would say that that your thanks to me is actually thanks to them. But on another occasion is a question to which you could react either by suggesting something to read or by your own position on it. What is the position that cross-cultural psychologists would like to take on the development of large-term AIs and deep AIs that are coming out? AI means artificial intelligence and so on. They are having some implication in face recognitions. They are having cultural problems therein. And if AI becomes the way of solving cross-cultural differences, then what is the future that you see in it?
Well, I think there is a great future and a very great danger in artificial intelligence, and it depends on how these programs are written to a large extent. If it is indicated what background people come from, when data are fed into the program, it may well be that differences in subtle differences in face recognition and in making faces, in expressing emotions on the face, cross-cultural differences, country differences are identified. If the program is set up a bit differently, these may be missed. So I am not entirely sure that there are not that it is inescapable that all important parameters are identified in such research. But you know, my answer is pure speculation. I know that there have been studies on artificial intelligence where the results are overtaken by more recent studies. So it is too early to say whether there's sort of any definite developments in let's say, topics which traditionally are being studied by cross-cultural psychology. So I'm failing to give you a good answer, Raghu.
Anup, I see your face. do you have some comment?
Well, Professor Poortinga was our teacher in 1981, and he did a session where statistically he proved that two cultures cannot be compared. And being an organizational psychologist, I have been using this phrase of organizational culture to solve many managerial problems. But I also felt that this concept is too big, just like, as you mentioned, culture. Can we go for micro concept? Because there is something when we compare societies, when we compare organizations, when we compare families, there is something that differentiates. It may be very small, but it makes a big difference. So is there a need to have micro concepts to explain these differences? And these concepts, for me, maybe like, beliefs, values, right? So should we go for micro concepts?
Well, I think, and whether you go for big concepts or micro concepts, what to me is important is that you give a definition of your variables, what you mean with it. So if you have microculture, what does microculture stand for? And if you have two organizations and you want to indicate what the differences are in the functioning of the two organizations, you can say they have a different culture, but then you're not saying anything. You can say that from any pair of organizations, they differ in culture. So what you want to do is you want to make that, in my opinion, far more specific. And the difference between two organizations may be that the one has much more centralistically oriented leadership than the other. They may be in different parts of the country with a workforce which is far higher educated in the one organization than in the other organization. These are just two examples of many things on which organizations can differ, and particularly in the management, how the organization is being led. And there, of course, are also important differences in terms of national legislation, for example, between Western European countries and the United States. In Western Europe, labor laws tend to be more strict than in the US. We have minimum wages. Well, I think there's in the US also a minimum wage, but you know that is extremely low. In the Netherlands, for example, it is much higher. And all these things have an impact. And it is very difficult to identify which factor is the crucial factor in a particular instance. And that's why you need, as an organizational psychologist studying culture in organizations, you need to have a wide experience. And you have to find out in an exploratory fashion what could be the reasons for differences. And I think that's what you're doing.
Okay, I see three more faces here. Anjali, Romana, Sandeep. Any one of you want? Yeah, Romana, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank you, Professor Poortinga, for this insightful lecture. My question to you is regarding the point that you said that we are living in times of super diversity and where there's a lot of cultural mixing taking place. So what implication does it have in, do we need a new perspective in doing cross-cultural psychology? Because we might be located in different cultures, but there's a lot of similarities because of the contact.
Yeah, I think that so far, and I apologize, and I think as a Western psychologist, cross-cultural psychologist, I should be ashamed. The West has often been leading in terms of concepts, in terms of topics. You know, if you look, for example, at illiteracy, there isn't a rich literature in the West, but or adult illiteracy. But of course, in a country like yours, this is an important issue. but you do not find it in international psychology. And that goes for many things. We have been setting the scene. And if you look at cross-cultural studies, they are often on a theory or even an instrument developed by some author in the West. And if you are interested as a cross-cultural psychologist in extending data, that is taken as a lead, and then you invite your colleagues in India and Indonesia and wherever to collect data for you. That's not a cross-cultural study in the sense it should be. If you look, for example, nowadays at projects of the OECD, the projects on education, like TALIS, etc., there groups of people with expertise from all participating countries come together and they discuss how the research should be set up. In this case, evaluation, research, and education, what the role of parents is, etc., etc. And everybody has an input. And not only at the end, right from the start of a project. And I think that that is the model which cross-cultural psychology has to follow. There have to be teams of researchers, which are composed of all participating societies, or at least representatives of all people who can represent every society, every population. There has to be discussion on how it is to be set up. There has to be discussion on the content validity of scales, or what there has to be discussions on the method, etc., etc. And then there may be a chance of building a far more truly comparative international cross-cultural psychology. We have been too one-sided. There is too much Western dominance even today.
Thank you. Yeah, Sandeep, go ahead.
Sir, the term like psyche, they lost their relevance because market forces were not there. But with the culture, a lot of market forces are there and a lot of protectionist forces are there, which ensure that the instrumentality of culture remains relevant, and increasingly more and more text mining, web mining, using these tools, organizations are ensuring that we see population in terms of their cultural differences. Yes, what you are saying that the beaker in which population lived, that has become much more porous, much more interaction is there. So the cult of conventional kind may not be there, but as long as the geopolitical forces are there and market forces are there, they ensure that culture remains more important actually.
But okay. Look, I think that as academics, and I am in the luxurious position of having had a rather protected professional life as an academic, and many colleagues are in a much more difficult position. But I would say that we also have a kind of idealistic responsibility. As cross-cultural psychologists, it is almost our defined expertise that we can look beyond our own limitations in terms of the context which we live in. And that experience, that expertise, I think we have to bring to the global village. That gives us a responsibility. And of course, you know, everybody's first concern is to earn bread for the family. And to have a good job, and I don't know what, but we have ultimately as a human species, we have to have also an idealistic side to our activities, and I'm appealing to that. And in a sense, I have found that in the work of Allahabad psychologists, and you know. the people I have been mentioning are not belonging to the other classes of the Indian society, but they have worked on, they have expressed concern on these underclass groups in Indian society. And that is what I have perhaps done to, not what I have done too little in my life. So in a sense, I am apologizing. At the same time, this is what I learned in Allahabad.
Thank you. Who wants to come? I saw Mala's face.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Good evening, Professor Poortinga. It was a pleasure to listen to you. I'm sure this question is really something you would have thought about in the last 2 years during the pandemic. And I'm curious to know what have been your observations, because what we have seen is that within India and across the globe, the countries and the states in India who had the best infrastructure and were the most developed have been impacted adversely by COVID much more than those countries. And within India, the states which are poorer, they have fared very well, and we have very little COVID in the poorer states of India as well. Since this makes it quite clear that infrastructure and probably biology was not so important, do you think the culture played some kind of a role for the kind of outcomes we have seen, the adverse outcomes of COVID in the developed countries and in India in the developed states?
Yeah, there's many things to answer. But the first is that the virus does not really deal with differences in biology in the human species, I guess.
Yes.
So there are probably some behavioral factors which we should look at. And in traditional societies, I think people are living more in clusters than in a large Western or Indian urban society. So the spread of the virus is probably affected by these physical contextual circumstances. That would be my first guess. And you probably in a better position with all the richness and variety of India to confirm or disconfirm that. There's another point, and that is probably more bitter. In Western countries like the Netherlands, there is an excellent registration of people getting the illness, how they proceed through the illness, and if people happen to pass away because of COVID-19, they are registered as the victims of the illness. How good are your statistics? That's probably where you have to begin. And I can imagine that in poorer areas, in rural areas in India, many people have passed away, and it is not very clear, particularly when they were old, when there were underlying illnesses, whether they actually passed away because of the immediate effects of the COVID-19 or secondary effects of COVID-19, or whether they just passed away for some other reason. So there's many difficulties, but I think that the virus is not very sensitive to subtle differences between human groups.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think
Sir, Deepak Gupta wants to ask.
Couple of more, not more than that. It is now 6:50, and Subhra has a question. Please go ahead, Subhra.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for an excellent, thought-provoking presentation, Professor Poortinga. My question is very short. It is, in fact, a query in my mind that how does multiple disciplines or the inclusion of multiple disciplines in cross-cultural psychology, what are your thoughts on that? Because real-life world problems more and more are not getting solved by single disciplines approach, whether it is behavior change or anything. So your thoughts on inclusion of another layer, which is multiple disciplines in cross-cultural psychology.
Yeah. Well, I have dealt mainly with a single discipline, and then one can say a very small part of it. It has been overwhelming. It has been very difficult to do proper research and to sort of take everything within that small realm as far as necessary into consideration. And now you're saying, well, you better multiply that by several orders of size almost. And I think that is the difficulty of interdisciplinary research. And that is also why we do it so little. But you're absolutely right. I mean, to think that there is only a psychological perspective or an economic perspective or a biological perspective or whatever you want to say is per definition giving a too limited representation. At the same time, I think that as scientists, we cannot study complexities. We have to isolate, to try to isolate the phenomena we are interested in a particular moment. And I think that will always remain the basis of disciplinary science. And I think that science will always consist of disciplines. But if we're not aware of the shortcomings which we're introducing when we do ourselves, when we are isolating phenomena, then we will just get lost in the end. So you're absolutely right. I don't know how to follow up.
Thank you. The last one, Anjali, you have a question?
Sir, Dr. Deepak Gupta has put a question in the chat box.
Okay, but I have requested Anjali, then Deepak.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing chat box. You have to raise hand and I should be able to see you. Yes, Anjali, you have question? No. Anjali Srivastava, I can see you.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everybody. Sir, the question which Shubhra asked, the query which she had in mind, that was just associated with that. So it is cleared, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, now Deepak. Deepak, chat box, where I cannot see chat box.
Sir, his
my knowledge is very poor.
Sir, do you want me to read his question?
Let him read. Deepak, come forward. Okay, read his question.
Okay, so his question is, much of the business organizations thrive on the concept of culture and spend huge monies on building a culture. Have you got any comments or feedback from the world of business on this prophecy?
You're referring to Pfizer, the vaccine for the COVID? It's very difficult to understand. Perhaps is it a possibility that you write the question on the chat?
Well, can I explain? It is related to my question. Both of us come from the same background. What Deepak is telling, he's a business consultant, that we business consultants make a lot of money with the concept of organizational culture, right? And if we accept your proposition that, look, it is a weak concept, then the millions of dollars which are going in culture industry, you know, how those guys would survive.
Well, I mean, I have once.
Professor Ipe, good evening. This is Deepak. I just got my audio back. And while I like what Professor Arnab Singh said, it's less about how we consultants would survive, but the honest query is, I mean, how do business organizations respond to this notion that culture is a concept which doesn't really have a meaning, or it's probably a dying concept?
I don't think he ever
first of all,
he didn't say
I am
that.
not saying that there are not important differences. If you have listened to my example of abortion, that's a huge difference. If you look at, for example, reactions of societies to homosexuality, whether they allow or do not allow homosexual acts between adults, these are enormous differences. The only thing is, are they sort of deep down, broad, generalizable, or are they more ad hoc? It's not that there are no important differences, and the same goes for organizations. But can you organize, or can you, as it were, define, conceptualize an organization in a broader set of concepts, and then say this applies to this organization, and we change the parameter values, and then we can talk about the other organization in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
There I have my doubts.
Okay. Okay.
And it is not, I mean, when in intercultural communication courses, you often hear, yeah, the Japanese are collectivists, and you Indians, by the way, also happen to be collectivists. You didn't know maybe, but let me tell you. You know, that kind of attitude. And often these approaches are very successful. The pupil does not have really the knowledge to sort of counter this, and it gives a structure. And even if it is not a correct structure, it still may be helpful to have the idea that you have a structure. But I mean, I once was at one of these intercultural communication courses, and then something was being said on the basis of Hofstede dimensions about the Japanese, and one of the participants said, yeah, but I have lived in Japan, and what you say, in my experience, does not make sense. And then the course leader said, oh yeah, but the exception confirms the rule. So, you know, there's always a way out. And I think an intercultural communication expert really has to be careful of not selling turnips for citrons to an audience.
Yeah. Okay.
It is not that there are no important differences, but I mean, are they related to a broad concept like organizational culture? That I
thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate, you know, the way you have responded to a span of questions coming from all sides. It has been very enriching experience. I think if I trying to understand prophecies, the definition of culture and the way broadly geography is used to define the culture, probably that is going to change. Income will be a major variable. Poor of slums of Bombay or slums of Nagpur and slums of Amsterdam's and slums of Newark will constitute a different population than the corporate people and those who are working with corporates and thriving on using the term culture to make money. That definition is probably going to have some challenging situation. And the situation of locating culture with geography, probably other parameters. Earlier also cross-cultural psychologists didn't say that geographical boundary is cultural boundary, but there are going to be other parameters. The concept is going to continue. The parameters are going to change. Concerns and dimensions may go through modification. And that is the exciting time to come. Artificial intelligence is another issue. now the digital world is going to do what to our mind is yet to be seen and all that. So we are living in exciting time. AUPAA and Professor Tripathi and I will be gone, but he will be seeing it more. So you may recall AUPAA's talk for long time. Thank you, AUPAA. This has been, I would like everyone to unmute and clap for him. Unmute and clap.
Thank you very much.
I would like to recognize presence of family members of Professor Sinha, the chairperson of Professor Durganand Sinha Social Science Trust, Sri Premanandji, his younger son Snehanandji, and Professor Mala Sinha was also here in discussion. If they are present here, we really appreciate their presence and their commitment to keep contributing to psychology, to follow Professor Sinha's legacy in psychology research, and to propagate that legacy by organizing annually. We have memorial talk on the name of Professor Sinha. So we appreciate that. A great contribution of the family. This is a rare thing which happens, but it happens. It is also a rare thing that department is celebrating with so much enthusiasm, not only Diamond Jubilee, also the centennial year of Professor Sinha, anniversary. As it is centennial anniversary year for us. The book is going to come, and there are many other things under planning. So this part of the program I was asked to chair. I am sorry if I have, I don't know technology much, so I may not have, called all of you who wanted to speak. So please bear with me, and thank you so much. And we really learned in the lecture. We re-established our association with you, and we appreciate your presence, time, and energy. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
If you want, you can continue. They are holding some other things in this.
We are having some very good programs, sir. So please.
Yeah.
So after the centennial lecture from Professor Poortinga, now let us move to relive the golden days of our life in the department. So with Professor R.C. Tripathi and Professor Durganand Sinha. Aditi, do you want to say something about this program?
I wanted to invite Raghu sir to kindly take the session forward, which he has very aptly titled Reminiscences, along with Professor Ramacharan Tripathi sir. Over to Raghu sir.
Thank you, Aditi. You've permitted me to share the screen. I'm sharing the screen. Please acknowledge if you see the screen of mine.
I can, sir. Your screen is visible.
Okay. It's been a long tradition in the department to tutor your students to teach. And I have been in a collaborative position with Professor Tripathi and other teachers in the department to take joint classes. That was also one of the innovations for which the department is known. And therefore, I would take the lead in this presentation, but it is actually a joint presentation, and we would invite others to come in. This is not a history in the true sense of the word. It is more, and Poortinga would like the term, it is more of itihas. It's a term which we use in India for things that happen. Please do not search for a big pattern and causation in the events that I am going to narrate out here. they are just events in history, may or may not be causally related to one another. There is another limiting factor. This is a pictographic history, in the sense is that we've collected pictures over the years, and alumni have posted these pictures. So we are drastically limited in the availability of pictures. We can only show that which we can, for which we have photographs. And last but not least, it is a time constraint kind of a thing. I would probably end up taking about 20 minutes. And therefore, we apologize that we cannot show everything, but it is Itihas in the making. We intend to make an audiovisual document of the department. Let me begin by the first coincidence that takes place, and that is, this is the Allahabad University calendar of 1900 to 1901. Now, what is it doing out here? I will let you know, but there's no causation here. Two things I wanted to show in this picture. One was that the university under the British emblem did not have the banyan tree. And the second thing I wanted to show was this gentleman, Raja Bahadur Krityanand Singh, father of Durganand Sinha that you know, and he passed and he gave his BA exams and passed BA in 1902 from this university. I'm sure that has nothing to do with Professor Sinha coming and joining the Allahabad University. This is Professor Durganand Sinha in 1945. He does his MA from Patna University in philosophy with a special paper in psychology. And he did achieve a gold medal, which continued to be the record marks held in Patna University till 1992, when somebody else did a little better than him. And we often discuss that that little better is not really better, because it was the best of time was the olden period when you could not get so much marks. In 1946, Professor Sinha leaves for Cambridge. He joins St. John's College in Cambridge. And oops, where did this come from? Yeah. This is a photograph of Professor Sinha in 46 or 47. We are not too sure of the date, but there are two interesting people out here with whom Professor Sinha studied. Right here, wait, I will just a minute. This gentleman that you see with a navy cut coat is Sir Frederick Bartlett, the gentleman who started the effort after meaning, the meaningful, as opposed to Ebbinghausen's, this thing, who was his tutor, and he did his MSc under Frederick Bartlett. But more interestingly, at the same time, there was a gentleman visiting out there, and the gentleman with the wristwatch and waistcoat, the chain that you see, is Jean Piaget. Piaget was one of Professor Sinha's lecturer, and he was visiting St. John's College at that time. And Professor Sinha never always respected his teachers and would always tell us some story or the other of Piaget and Frederick Bartlett. And this another gentleman who Professor Sinha meets with the Indian flag, 1946. The gentleman out there is Abu Salam. He was the Nobel Prize winner from Pakistan in 1979, I think, or 78, I'm not too sure. And he won the Nobel Prize for physics. Yeah, 79 he won. And he was a good friend of Professor Sinha. And when he, Dr. Salam, when he visited India in 1982 or 83, I'm not too sure, there was a special invite sent to Professor Sinha, and Professor Sinha went to meet him. Henceforward, in this presentation, Professor Sinha would be referred to as Profi, because we students, after the generation of Professor Tripathi, we students used to call him affectionately Profi. This is Professor Sinha in 1948 or 49, or the end part of 48, where Professor Mohsin goes to England and recruits Professor Sinha for a post in Patna University. And Professor Sinha returns back in 49 with an MSc degree in psychology. And Professor Mohsin welcomes him to the Department of Psychology, which has already been established in Patna University, where he stays till he leaves for Kharagpur. But this is Professor Mohsin and Professor Sinha. And here you have Professor Mohsin and Professor Sinha in I think it's 84. And Professor Mohsin was always graced us with his visit. And Professor Sinha was very, very respectful towards Professor Mohsin. And Professor Mohsin was one of the most affectionate persons that Professor Sinha used to bring to the department. Professor Sinha was very proud of him, of his students. Here is one of his students from the Patna University days, and that's Professor J.P.T. Sinha. You have another student of his, Professor J.P. Das. Here is Professor Sinha in Paris. I think Janakji would be in better position. If Professor Sinha was very fond of his students,
JVP was not his student.
गो तुम्हारी आवाज चली गई. Well, it's true that JBP was not his student. JBP ने जो है अपना okay.
Sir Amar Kumar Singh was his student.
हाँ, रांची से पढ़े हुए थे तो.
No.
नहीं सॉरी नहीं, हाँ अमर कुमार सिंह उनके स्टूडेंट थे, राइट. रांची से जनक जी पढ़े हुए थे.
क्या हुआ? नेट चला गया.
रघु का नेट चला गया है.
जी सर, इंटरनेट इशू.
You only have to wait, I guess. I think there is no choice.
This is Corona syndrome.
Achha ji.
Technology ditches you when you need it the most.
Right.
So Professor Indira Parekh from IIM Ahmedabad, she was the dean and she retired as dean, and she was sharing this. So way back in early 70s, there were those slides which she had prepared, and she was on a visit to another country. And there the electricity went off. And she said, immediately I created an exercise.
Okay, now Raghu is back.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It just so happened that my connectivity went off. This is Professor Sinha in China in 87. There's an interesting anecdote related to this. Professor Sinha went there. He was one of the first kind of psychologists who went to Beijing University. There was a group photograph, and the public announcement system says that the group photograph, all the older people will sit on the chair, and the younger people will carry the chairs for them and sit on the floor. Professor Sinha came back. He was the last person in the list. Everybody out there was over 80. And so Professor Sinha says that here is China in social science. Remember, it is the recovery years of China. Professor Sinha in Liège with his colleagues. One of the qualities by which we remember Profi is his ability to relate right from the youngest to the oldest, his colleagues, his teachers, and that relationship shows all over. Professor Tripathi, in his introductory remark today, talked about one of the ex-students who's doing so well in the establishment of Lincoln. Here is Rashmi Rekha Sinha. Wait, let me show it to you. Oops, this thing went off. This is Rashmi Rekha Sinha, who is running the LinkedIn and who did her PhD from Brown University.
Abu, sorry, this is her elder sister.
Oh, yes, I thought as much, Komi. This is her younger sister, sorry.
And her elder sister.
The one who's in the income tax. Who's in income tax?
IRS or something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought as much. This Professor Sinha, win various awards. He got many awards. It's very difficult to list all of them out here. I've been searching for photographs of his award listening. The two of them that he had shown me, this is when he got the Wundt Award in 1972.
No, 1980.
80. Okay.
Yes.
That's
in 1980, International Congress Psychology was held in Leipzig, Germany.
Yeah.
And Wundt's award was given to selected few international senior people, and he was one of them.
Yeah. So that's the awards picture. We had talked about Professor Sinha's contributions, and here is one of his earliest writings of 1969, I think his first book that came out, or I'm not too sure whether the Mughal Syndrome came out after this or before this, but I think this was the first one. This is the Indian Village in Transition.
Mughal Syndrome came out much after this. This was his first book.
That's what I thought, sir. This was their first book. And probably this was the last book that he wrote. Many chapters he wrote after this, but contribution.
By the way, that was not the last.
Okay.
This is not the last.
Last
yeah,
book,
go ahead.
Book I thought this was the last that at least I have out here. Would Professor, sir, would you like to say something about the two felicitation volumes that came out? Professor Tripathi?
Okay, all right. I think the one on the left, which you see, Psychology in Human and Social Development. It's a book which has been edited by Professor John Berry. You heard him yesterday. And by one of his students, C. Mishra, and by myself, There was a project which started where we thought that we will invite Professor Sinha's friends and maybe colleagues to who were associated with him and who had worked in this area called human and social development. So what we did was that we invited from, John was there, then there were people from Mexico, there were people from various other countries, and a symposium was organized in Montreal. Quite a few of these people came, and finally this book was put together by us. As I said, that the lead editor of this book is John Berry. This was, I think, I remember, if I remember, Janakji may correct me, was 85 probably.
76. No, 96. 96.
Sorry, 96. Yes, 96. This was shortly before. He was there. He was there in the Montreal Congress. Yeah.
He was also in the symposium, not a
Yes.
speaker.
Right. The book by Grisha Mishra contains, papers which are sort of amplify what Professor Durganand Sinha has written. So If you are interested, you just go through these two books. They are available in the library.
This is a photograph of Professor Profi at John Berry's.
John Berry showed this yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. One of the reasons for showing this photograph was that Profi always had a childlike curiosity and was absolutely thrilled by doing new things. And that curiosity and his experiment and the simplicity of looking at new things in a childlike way actually showed in his research too. And one of the most infectious disease that he gave us was this curiosity, for which we are very indebted to him. If there was anything other than academics he liked more, it was eating. And he was very fond of...
Raghu,
Yes,
recognize Ajit Dalal in the previous book.
Yeah, people could see that. That John Berry also, this is, he liked food. Here's Professor Sinha at a dinner at Professor Tripathi's place, probably just very soon, they had recently they had moved into the new quarters of the professors. There is Professor Pohan is, I think, there. There's Professor Naidu, Professor Janak Pandey, Tripathi, Deepti, and Mrs. Sinha. I would like to say that Professor, whatever he achieved in academics and relations, a very strong force behind Professor was Lalkaki ji, or Mrs. Sinha, as we used to refer to her. She was one of the most affectionate lady, a stable support, and almost all of us who came in contact with Professor Sinha and her got the greatest affection. She had affection for everyone, cared for everyone, and probably the legacy that Professor Sinha lives behind. I'm not too sure whether you'd agree with this, but probably the main force behind him was his wife, Lalkaki ji, who, if Komi wants to come in, she could look affectionately at Professor Tripathi, Naidu Sahab, and invariably would inquire about them. Never intrusive, but always giving her affection very freely to anyone who came in contact with her. And no tribute to Professor Sinha can be complete without her. This is her, and here she is when she became the chairperson of the Sinha Memorial lecture series, lighting the lamp. And here is Professor Sinha's memorial lecture which Sudhir Kakkar gave with some audience. That is his son, his elder son, his wife.
Rajan Harse was also there.
Yeah, Rajan Harse was sitting behind out here. So this is Professor Sinha's. This is Professor Sinha in 1961. That's when he establishes the Department of Allahabad. Oops. This is the first batch of students from 1961 to 63. There are a few people whom you might recognize, and I will enlarge them in the next slide so that you can see it. But I want to make a special mention, since we were talking about continuity of Professor Sinha's memory. This gentleman sitting out here is Professor Sinha's second son, and I know he is there in the audience, so he could see himself out here. That is Snehanand Sinha, better known as Robbie. If you haven't noticed, there's in this same picture, this is Mrs. Naidu as student. Induji, as she was known at that time, as a student. In the same photograph, this was Professor E.S.K. Ghosh as student. And in that same photograph was one of our first teachers in the department, other than Professor Sinha, Prem Kumar. I'm sorry, not Pramod Kumarji, Prem Shankarji, Pramod Kumarji. This is the 63 batch. This is the batch of Professor Naidu. And there are some interesting additions from the previous batch if you want to compare it. There is no Professor Tripathi in this photograph because Professor Tripathi has not joined us. And here he is in this photograph. There are some very interesting people out here for the psychologists. One of the persons that Professor Tripathi referred to in the introductory section, Professor Klee, here is Klee. He is the tallest man and we had to get a special bed made for him. I'm very aware of that fact when that happened a long time ago. This is Professor C.M. Bhatia, who was the Vice Chancellor of our university at that time. And he is the person who made the Bhatia inventory test and intelligence. I think he was Benet's student or came from that tradition. This is Professor Tripathi, the first year of joining Allahabad University as a teacher. This is Professor Naidu as a student in that same photograph. Here is Davyanti Subedar, who later went on to become India #1 and Asia #2 in badminton. And last but not least, here is Meeraji as a student. Oops, what is it doing? This is another batch of students where Professor Naidu is still a student. One of the reasons why I put this picture on was what Professor Tripathi had talked about was Usha Sadhana as the first one of our students who alumni from this university or department who went to become the head director of TIS. We will come to Shalini next time.
She passed away very recently.
Yeah, she passed away. This is a photograph, and it's a kind of a historic photograph, not only for me, but for the department too. This is a department the building had come up and there were no furniture in the department. Professor Sinha decided that from that old one room, one hall building, and they used to have this group photograph taken in front of the Senate Hall. He says that since the department structure is up, we will take the photograph at the department structure. It's 1967, I think, or later part of 1967. And the department actually started operating in this new building in 1968.
It so happens that this photograph also has a person who is very significant in Raghu's life. She's standing right behind, very close to Professor Mohsin. Maya Sinha.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that.
Oh, well, we were talking about history. So.
Okay.
This is, I think, 1970 or 71 batch, 71 batch. Interestingly, some of you might find some people whom you might recognize. And this is Professor R. Mishra. I think I saw him in the audience. I hope he's still there, where he can see. Sir, are you still there? He happened to teach me also. He took a paper in MA. The department was not only teaching, but it was also teaching teachers to teach. This is the winter school, I think it used to be called at that time, with Professor Paranjpe. There are two people out here who might interest us. Of course, there is Professor Naidu, Musa, Patiji, Professor Sinha. I think Professor Sinha was then, he had gone to Sinha Institute when this happened, was he?
He was a UGC National Fellow. He was a UGC National Fellow. He was on leave, but then he was very much part of us. This happened just before he went to Montreal and had his heart attack.
In that group photo was a young Mr. Jain, UC Jain. Udayji Jain joined us as a faculty in 78 and was with us for a very long time. Then he left for Riva. And in that group photograph, there was another gentleman whom we are all familiar with, who was there yesterday. I do not know whether he came and joined us today, was Ajit Mahanti. This is a faculty improvement program for winter school. The winter school did not end there. This is a more recent photograph of Professor R.K. Mishra, who was a teacher at our place, and he gave a training program on, I think, Rorschach. This was the Rorschach workshop. Komi would be able to tell me a little more about it. Komi?
Yeah. I think he used to come, I think, probably annually, maybe in winter, and he used to hold these training programs. Okay. So, and I think this was one of the earlier training programs, but he did try to introduce new innovations in the Rorschach. He brought in the Exner system and learner system also. So he was trying to give back whatever he had learned to us. Yeah.
During the department in the 60 years, many professors and visiting lecturers came around. One of the first few people I remember who came here was Professor Gustav Jahoda. Gustav Jahoda came, I think, in 73, as it says. Then came Mackin Marriott. Then came Arthur Jensen. It's almost like a who's who out here. So is that Biv Latane? Yeah. And then Derogosky, Michael Argyle, Harry Frianders, Pepperton, Robbie Kadungo, Dhanagre, oops. And you're going to sing many names that I have not been able to add due to paucity of time. The department was not only interested in teaching and scholarship, academic activity, it also reached out to society. And that was the training given to most of us by Professor Sinha. And here is Professor Naidu reaching out in a children's project, hospital and hygiene project. He also did a university traffic project, and Komi did a project outreach for mental health. The point being made that the department reached out and felt the social responsibility to reach out to society and try and use some of the psychological principles to make society a better place. Not only that, the department used to have a psychological society inside the department for cultural activities. This is the batch which won the A.N. Sinha team event.
A.N. Shah.
A.N. Shah, sorry. A.N. Sinha.
This is Shubhra.
Yes, Shubhra is here. Anshu Mehra is here.
Also Reena Kaul.
Reena Kaul is here also. She's a sports psychologist. And this is Anil. By the way, he's not standing on a chair. He was tall. And who else do we remember?
Kaushal is here. Rajiv is here.
Kaushal is here.
Kaushal, Prachi.
Prachi is there.
Prachi is there.
Mohan, Meenakshi. And I think she was the president. I don't remember. She was a Tandon. Renu Tandon's younger sister, Nina. Maybe her name was Nina Tandon. She was the president
was she?
of the
Okay.
Psychological Society. Yeah.
Okay. Society did all the other activities. Here is Namrata Pandey and Lalit Mohan Joshi, who's a classmate of, batchmate of mine, doing a drama. Out here, a Society Day function. Sorry, what is skipping? Deepak, can you see yourself?
Yes, I can. And thank you very much for putting up the very starved looking picture of mine.
Yes. Anup, if you are around, you can see it. Biswas, if you are around. Kavita, if you are around. Can you locate yourselves in this picture? This is a picture of the
Shitab is there.
25th.
Anand Prakashji is there.
Shweta,
Yes.
Arvind is there. Arvind is also there.
Arvind is there.
Rajendra Tripathi, Mishra ji, Rekha Singhal now, Gyan Mudra,
Yeah.
Shashwat, and I think this is Dubey ji.
Yes,
Dubey ji. And who's the other one? Yeah, in the corner. That's Komi.
Komi ji.
That's Komi. And of course, I'm behind the camera. Just to show you that this was another reunion. This is 2019 reunion. Is that so? Aditi, can you say something about this picture? Because I think
Yes, so the day was 27th January 2019. It was the second day of the second alumni meet, and this was the day the first general body meeting of the association was held. And there I'm in the center, the one in red, not the center, but yes, almost the center. And I came to know much later that a lot of the other students were quite jealous because Romana ma'am had her hand around my shoulder. So many of them were jealous that I got that special treatment and affection. But yes, and the smile is it all.
And
Sandeep, would you like to come in?
I think Sandeep is there and Archana, sadly, no more with us. But she's there.
Yeah, Archana is here.
Akshita is there.
Archita is here.
Agini, Payal, Saloni.
The department would not have achieved great heights had it also not been for our staff out there. In Allahabad University, there is an institution called Phokat. And Kanta Prasad ji was the first chaprasi that we had, and he, office peon. Here is Kanta Prasad and Moti. In the next photograph, you see Moti, Biblakant Pandey. This is the staff which supported us. Then you see Aziz, Rajan Babu, Mohan Lal.
Sorry to interrupt, but Kamta Prasad has such a power over his students. Everybody, respected him so much.
Yes. He had the same power in his union also. He was a friendly union activist in the class 4 union, and he did command. But there was something about him which actually, he was in love with the department. All these people out here actually worked from their heart for the department. I would like to mention, I did try to search for a photograph. The silent and the absent person out here is Rajan. Rajan was an institution. He worked very, very quietly, but was completely devoted to the department. I would say that we need to acknowledge and thank these members of the staff who made the department what it is. Not only the department, it made our relationship, that is the students and the teachers' relationship, and they contributed to that relationship. One of the things that started in 1998 was an HRDM program, which Professor Tripathi referred to in the introductory lecture. Unfortunately, I do not have any photograph of the first batch, but this is the second batch of students. There's an interesting thing that happened in this HRDM program. Every year we got one person from the army, and every year we got promoted. This is
Major
Captain,
Salim.
Major Salim at that time.
Aslam's brother.
Aslam's brother, right? And the next year we got a lieutenant colonel, and the next year we got a full colonel. Had we continued for a very long time in this course, we would have got a general once. But that's the thing. There were outsiders coming in, non-psychology students who were being catered for, and the reach and the impact of HRDM is immense, as acknowledged by Professor Tripathi. We have also the last batch of HRDM, it is 2004 and 2006, which was done. In 1989 comes the first journal issue, and the journal also has traveled a bit. This is the first journal issue. You can see number 1 and volume number 1, January to July 1989. And this is the newest cover which I got from the net. I'm sorry for the photograph, but that's the best that we could get. One of the part of reminiscence of this thing is, with the help of alumni, we tried to do some analysis of the contributions to the journal. The journal gets, the picture shown here is of the world, which has contributed more than 2 articles in the journal. Those who contributed only 1 article, we could not map on this thing because of the program limitations, but this is what the journal, the world over. That means Allahabad University through the journal, Allahabad Psychology Department through the journal has impacted and influenced and is influenced by these countries. The journal
also just a minute.
Yes.
What I think you may want to add is that this shows the contribution which we have received from various parts of the world, but the journal is read in about 185 countries. So that's something which I think we probably need to be very, very proud of.
Right, sir. We're trying to map this. This is an ongoing project. Out here you see what is called local citation. That is the journal, our journal in some article or in some ways are being referred to in these journals. So the maximum people who seem to cite our journals are cited in the Journal of Personality and Social. These are only 20 journals that we have taken at this point of time. The reciprocalness is also something that we are going to look at, and this shows the impact of the journal. Further, this is the matrix that we have been trying to evolve for the impact of the department and its connectivity, showing that all over the world, these are the associations. These are collaborative works cited by only the 2 of those whom you've seen related. So this is just a dyad thing. We have also been able to map up the entire network. This brings me to the end of the presentation. Let me also say that this department has not only given us excellence in academic sphere, but more importantly, it has shown that relationships matter, and it is through the relationship and the alumni who remember these relationships that the association and department has reached this impact. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I forgot. Let me also request all the alumni to send in any photos that they have so that the Alumni Association and the department can make an archive. And when we come out with the audio-visual document in a much more polished way than I could present out here, we would be able to use those photographs. Please date your photographs, and if possible, write a few lines as to what it depicts. We are in the active form of making an archive for the department. Thank you very much.
There is a message in the chat box that Professor Grishwar Mishra is here.
Jeez, yes.
If he wants to say something.
Yes, please.
Professor Grishwar Mishra, are you there? We want to hear you, sir. I think he has left. So now we move to the...
Sir, a minute, ma'am. Sir, the surprise, the 60.
Oh, yes. You go ahead, Aditi. Go ahead. Sorry, I forgot. Sorry.
So very interestingly, the 60 years of the department in 60 seconds via the different professors who have led the department.
Thank you, Aditi.
With this, we come to the end of the day 1 session. And now I would like to invite Dr. Kavita Agarwal, Secretary, Allahabad University Psychology Alumni Association, to kindly propose the final vote of thanks.
I appreciate and thank you all for the time you have taken out for this wonderful evening. And tomorrow we have 2 sessions. Session 1 will start at 11 a.m. It is an alumni-student interaction. And second session will be from 7:30 p.m. It is a cultural program where alumni and students will provide some light moments. And with the permission of the advisors and president, Allahabad University Psychology Alumni Association, I hereby close this session and see you all tomorrow at 11.
Okay, thank you, Kavita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, AUPAA, for hours with us. Thank you, AUPAA, once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Poortinga, for being with us.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.